For years, we've been told a simple story about blood pressure, cut the salt, and everything will fall into place. Clean, logical, easy to follow. And for a long time, I believed it completely. I told my patients the same thing, day after day, appointment after appointment. But over time, something didn't add up. I began seeing people who had done everything right, people who followed every rule, and yet, their bodies were telling a very different story. Their blood pressure stayed high. Their arteries showed damage that shouldn't have been there. That's when I realized something important. The story we've been telling is only half the truth, and the half we've been missing might be the one that matters most. For decades, the message around blood pressure has been remarkably consistent. Reduce salt intake, monitor your numbers, take your medication if prescribed, and you'll be on the right path. It's a message that makes sense. It's easy to explain and easy to remember. In a busy clinic, where time is limited and patients need clear direction, simple advice often becomes the default. I followed that same approach for years. I repeated it thousands of times, genuinely believing I was offering the best possible guidance. And for some patients, it worked. Their numbers improved. Their risks decreased. Everything seemed to align with what we expected. But then there were others. Patients who did everything right, people who were disciplined, consistent, and committed to their health. They ate well. They exercised regularly. They avoided smoking and excessive alcohol. They took their medications exactly as prescribed, and yet their blood pressure remained stubbornly elevated. At first, it was easy to assume these were exceptions. After all, no medical approach works perfectly for everyone. But over time, those exceptions became too frequent to ignore. The real turning point came not in the clinic, but in the operating room. When you're looking directly at the arteries of a living human being, there's no room for abstraction. You're not dealing with numbers on a chart anymore. You're seeing the actual condition of the vessels, their thickness, their stiffness, their ability to expand and contract, and what I kept seeing didn't match the story we were telling. I remember one patient in particular. He was in his early 70s, a retired teacher. He had lived what most would consider an ideal lifestyle. He walked several miles every day. His diet was balanced and thoughtful. He had never smoked. He rarely drank. He followed every recommendation given to him over the years. Yet his blood pressure had been elevated for more than a decade. When I operated on him, the condition of his arteries was striking. They were stiff, narrowed, and far less flexible than expected. It was the kind of vascular damage typically associated with a very different lifestyle. That moment stayed with me, because it raised a question I couldn't ignore. If this man had done everything right, why did his arteries tell a different story? That question led me down a path of deeper observation and reflection. I began to look beyond the standard explanations. I started paying closer attention to patterns, not just in test results, but in daily habits, routines, and metabolic signals that often go unnoticed. And gradually, a different picture began to emerge. The connection between salt and blood pressure is real. There's no denying that. Sodium affects fluid balance in the body, and increased fluid volume can raise pressure within blood vessels. That part of the story is accurate. But it's incomplete. For many individuals, especially as they get older, reducing salt intake leads to only modest changes in blood pressure. The numbers may improve slightly, but not enough to explain persistent hypertension. So the question becomes, what else is influencing this system? One of the answers lies in something that operates quietly in the background of everyday life, something that most people rarely think about in the context of blood pressure: insulin. Most people associate insulin with blood sugar. It's commonly discussed in relation to diabetes, and its primary role is well known, helping move glucose from the bloodstream into cells. But insulin has other effects, ones that don't receive nearly as much attention. One of those effects involves the kidneys. Insulin sends signals to the kidneys that influence how sodium is handled. When insulin levels are elevated, the kidneys are more likely to retain sodium rather than excrete it, and that changes the equation. Because now, sodium retention isn't just about how much salt is consumed, it's also about how the body is being instructed to handle that salt. If insulin levels remain elevated throughout the day, the kidneys continue receiving the same message: hold on to sodium. And when sodium is retained, fluid follows. And when fluid increases, pressure rises. This creates a situation where blood pressure can remain elevated even when dietary habits appear to be ideal. To understand how this plays out in daily life, it helps to look at how often insulin is being activated. Every time food is consumed, regardless of whether it's considered healthy or not, insulin is released. That's a normal and necessary process. But what matters is not just the release, but the frequency and duration. After a meal, insulin levels rise and typically take a couple of hours to return to baseline. During that time, the body is in a state of nutrient processing. But if another meal or snack is introduced before insulin has returned to baseline, the cycle begins again. And if this pattern continues throughout the day, insulin levels may remain elevated for extended periods. This pattern is common, especially among individuals who have been advised to eat smaller, more frequent meals. It often looks like this: a light breakfast, a mid-morning snack, lunch, an afternoon snack, dinner, and perhaps something small in the evening. Each of these eating occasions triggers an insulin response. Individually, they seem harmless, even beneficial. But collectively, they create a continuous metabolic signal, a signal that keeps insulin elevated. And when insulin stays elevated, the kidneys remain in sodium retention mode. The nervous system stays slightly activated. Blood vessels have less opportunity to fully relax. Over time, this can contribute to persistent pressure within the vascular system. Another factor that often goes unnoticed is the form in which food is consumed. Liquid calories behave differently from solid foods. When whole foods are eaten, the body processes them gradually. Fiber, structure, and digestion all play a role in slowing the release of nutrients into the bloodstream. But when foods are blended or juiced, that structure is altered. The result is a faster absorption of sugars and a quicker insulin response. This doesn't mean these foods are inherently harmful. It simply highlights how the body responds differently depending on how food is consumed. In a daily routine that already includes frequent eating, adding liquid calories between meals can further increase the number of insulin spikes. And again, it's not about a single event, it's about the pattern. Sleep introduces another layer to this discussion. During the night, the body is designed to enter a state of reduced activity. Heart rate slows, blood vessels relax, and blood pressure typically decreases. This nightly drop is an important part of cardiovascular health, but certain behaviors can interfere with this process. Eating close to bedtime is one of them. When food is consumed late in the evening, insulin levels rise at a time when the body would otherwise be preparing for rest. This can influence kidney function, nervous system activity, and vascular tone during the night. Instead of experiencing a natural reduction in blood pressure, the body may remain in a more active state, and over time, this can affect overall cardiovascular patterns. Another aspect worth considering is body composition, not just weight, but how fat is distributed within the body. There are individuals who appear healthy by conventional measures. Their weight falls within a normal range, their lifestyle habits are consistent, and yet underlying metabolic factors may tell a different story. Visceral fat, fat stored around internal organs, can play a significant role here. Unlike subcutaneous fat, which sits beneath the skin, visceral fat is metabolically active. It releases substances that can influence inflammation and insulin signaling. As insulin signaling becomes less efficient, the body compensates by producing more insulin, and once again, elevated insulin becomes part of the cycle. This creates a feedback loop. Increased insulin promotes sodium retention and vascular tension, while also making it more difficult to reduce the underlying metabolic imbalance. When viewed in isolation, each of these factors may seem small. But when they occur together, day after day, they create a consistent internal environment, one that can support elevated blood pressure even in the absence of obvious risk factors. This perspective doesn't replace the traditional understanding of blood pressure. It expands it. It shifts the focus from a single variable, salt intake, to a broader view that includes timing, frequency, metabolic signals, and physiological patterns. It also helps explain why some individuals see limited results despite following standard recommendations. Their efforts are not ineffective. They are simply addressing only part of the equation. Understanding this broader picture allows for a more complete interpretation of what the body is experiencing. It highlights how everyday habits interact with underlying physiology, and it offers a different way of looking at patterns that may have gone unquestioned for years. The body is not static. It responds continuously to signals, both internal and external. Blood pressure is not just a number, it's a reflection of multiple systems working together. When those systems are given the conditions to function as intended, periods of rest, balanced signaling, and time to regulate, different outcomes can emerge. This doesn't happen overnight, but patterns, once recognized, can be understood more clearly. And understanding is often the first step toward meaningful change, not through extremes, but through awareness. Not through rigid rules, but through a deeper appreciation of how the body operates. Because sometimes, the most important shifts don't come from doing more. They come from seeing more clearly what has been there all along.